Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast. Today, we are reading issue number 167, and just a little catch-up before we get into that. John is in the town of Highwater, which is in the Pacific Northwest. John came here originally because this is where his friend Lucky's wife lives, and Lucky was the person that he went to prison for killing, even though he was innocent because Lucky killed himself. So John came here to apologize to his wife and I guess make amends, but he also came here because Agent Frank Turo with the FBI got him out of prison, saying that he wanted John to help him find someone named S.W. Manor, and apparently this town of Highwater is connected to that person. So when John got to Highwater, we found out that this town is full of racists. There's like neo-Nazi groups and a guy named Major Gage who's leading them, and it turns out that they are buying guns from someone named Wolfman, and Wolfman is not down with the white power movement, and the neo-Nazis end up killing him and torturing him and carving some very nasty language into him. So in the last issue, we saw John ingratiate himself with Major Gage by offering to take care of the body for him so that no police come around. And we didn't see it, but John supposedly took a hacksaw and cut the gun dealer up, who's named Wolfman, and then buried him somewhere, presumably. But we didn't see any of that. We just saw John take a hacksaw, and then he later approached the neo-Nazi group in town and showed them the bloody hacksaw. Now, it turned out that Wolfman was just a middleman. He was just selling the guns to the neo-Nazis, but he was working for someone else, someone much more powerful, who we saw in some palatial estate, possibly in California or Florida, because there was palm trees. And he was not very happy that Wolfman got killed, so it seemed like he might be coming up to Highwater soon. And that, my friends, is where we left off on the last issue. So first things first, with issue 167, we got the cover. We see once again that neo-Nazi symbol at the top. And then like usual, on top of that, there are 4 images. One of them, of course, is John lighting a cigarette and smiling at us. There's 2 that are showcasing Jimmy's racial tattoos. One is of his face, where we see the word Warskin on his forehead. And then there's a horizontal image where his arms are out like he's on a cross, and we're seeing him from the back. And we can see on the back of his head, he has an SS tattoo. He has a swastika on his left arm. And he's got a giant, I think it's called an iron eagle on his back. Whatever the eagle is called that the Nazi used in their iconography. And we can also see that this is written by Brian Azzarello with art by Marcelo Fruchin. And we turn to the first page, and we are outside of the Highwater Tap, which is a bar that the neo-Nazis hang out in. And we see Jimmy leave the bar, and as we saw in the last issue, he was watching his son all day in this bar, and now he's taking his baby home. But as he leaves, we see somewhere across the street, maybe so Jimmy can't see, there are 2 people standing. One of them is obviously John, because there's a trench coat and really nice shoes, and the other person has bloody bare feet and torn jeans. And as Jimmy gets out of sight, we see the person with the bloody feet begin to walk towards the bar, and then we cut to inside the bar where all the other neo-Nazis are hanging out. Then we see a bloody hand with broken fingers grab the doorknob and turn it, and then we see the neo-Nazis look in fear as they turn to see who's entering the bar, and then they begin to scream and turn their table over as this broken and bloodied person looks to be getting some revenge on them. Then we finally get the reveal of who this person is, and it is the bloody body of Wolfman. It's not Wolfman himself, because it seems that John has used some Hebrew letters on his forehead and brought back the body of Wolfman as a golem. Now, if you don't know, a golem is kind of like a Jewish, I guess, monster or whatever, a defender, that you can put a word on something's head. You can usually make it out of like clay or something like that. It just has to be like vaguely human shaped. There has to be a head, because you have to write on the forehead of this being that you've made in Hebrew. And I don't know what the certain word is, but if you write it, it will animate this being that you've created. Now, I've never seen it used on a person, but apparently John is using it on a person. I don't know if that's correct or traditional, but he did it. And the use of a golem is usually to get revenge or to defend someone. So if you're being attacked, you make a golem and then they fight for you. At least that's what it is to my best understanding. I am not Jewish, so if I'm getting any of this wrong, I apologize. So overall, these images of John standing outside waiting for Jimmy to leave and then the golem going inside, we get some narration that says, "I believe if you don't live for something, you'll die for nothing. I believe I live for my family. And by that, I don't mean just my blood relatives, but my bloodline, my white American bloodline. I believe in my white brothers and sisters, those who have the guts to speak the truth and the stones to back it up. I believe I'm right. I believe I'm hated for what I believe. I believe I stand up to that hatred and reflect it back 100-fold. Now, they never really say who's narrating this in this issue, but I believe it's supposed to be Jimmy. And that last line is actually over the full-page splash of the reveal of the golem. And just to make sure you understand exactly what it is the beaten and broken, bloody, dead body of Wolfman. So it's pretty disgusting and messed up looking. And also on this page, we see the name of this issue is Highwater Part 4, Conclusion. Then we turn the page, and we cut to Major Gage's house where he's talking to his daughter Gwyneth, and he's saying, "Gwyneth, honey, about what you saw this morning." And of course, he's talking about the dead body of Wolfman because she snuck into his car and happened to see the dead body of Wolfman hanging from a tree. And Gage continues, "I'm sorry. I wish I could keep you away from that type of thing. But the truth is, I can't. Not as long as this country remains in the hands of those that seek to destroy it. Those that openly spit their bile in the faces of good people that live by God's laws. Laws that are written in the Holy Bible. We live by those laws. I don't think they're too harsh. Maybe it's because I'm not so arrogant as to think I know better than God." And he looks down at her and smiles, and Gwyneth looks up at him and says, "Race mixing is a sin in the eyes of the Lord, and the weed of the sin bears bitter fruit." And Gage replies, "Yes, darling, it certainly does." Then we come back to the neo-Nazi bar, where we see one of Jimmy's goons in this gang fly through the plate glass window and crash into the sidewalk outside, shoving bits of glass all in his face and his hands. Now, it's hard to tell because he's so beaten and bloody, but it looks like this is Kyle, the second in command. And so as Kyle recovers, he's wheezing a bit, and then someone approaches, and Kyle sees a shoe and he says, "Help me." But when he looks up, he sees John looking at him disdainfully, and John says, "You thick as pig shit? Help you? That's precisely what I'm doing." And then he grabs Kyle's face by the chin and holds it up to look at John, and he continues saying, "So how about you return the favor, sunshine? See, I've got a secret, and I want to tell it to you, so pay attention." And then he smiles, and he looks right in the face of Kyle, and he says, "The Jews really are the Lord's chosen people." And even though Kyle's hurt, he still manages to say, "No." And John continues, "Come on. It's as obvious as the blood on your face. Why else would the miserable bastard fuck with them so much if they didn't mean something to him? He's like a schoolboy, and they're the family dog, and he loves them dearly, but he can't help himself giving him a good boot in the buttocks every now and then." And Kyle wheezes, "You're lying." And John just smiles and says, "Am I? Tell me, where are the Jews now? Israel. After centuries of persecution, they finally got their own country. Why? Because a fucking maniac with a talent for bringing out the worst in people and having them believe it's their best killed 6 million of them. The Jews wouldn't have their bleeding promised land if it weren't for Hitler. File that under mysterious ways." And Kyle's looking at John with wide eyes now because it seems that what John is saying to him is maybe getting its way through. Now, the whole time John's been talking to Kyle outside, we've been getting flashes of the golem killing all the neo-Nazis on the inside. So by the time John is finishing with his conversation, the golem is finished killing all the people inside, and then John, referencing what he just told Kyle, says, "That's the secret. And the favor? I want you to let the Fuhrer in on it when you meet him." And with that, the golem pushes Kyle down and steps on Kyle's head with his bloody and broken foot. And we don't see it, but we can kind of assume that he just crushes Kyle's head, because John did just say, "When you see the Fuhrer in hell, tell him this secret." Then we turn the page, and we cut to the house of Major Gage again, and we see a helicopter landing in their front lawn. Then we see Major Gage's daughter, Gwyneth, open the door and just stand there as men walk out of the helicopter towards her. And as they're walking, the narration over those last panels says, "I believe that people fear the federal government, when it should be the other way around. I believe the government fears me. I believe it should." And we see the men from the helicopter reach the porch, so they're out of the shadows now. And we see a man smiling with a very kind of evil grin. He's a white guy with short brown hair. He's got a leather jacket on. And behind him are two black guys with leather jackets. And the henchman we saw in the last issue that was getting a phone call about Wolfman. So this is the head honcho guy that Wolfman was working for. So as he gets up to the front door, Gwyneth says, "Yes?" And the man answers, "Did you hear that, Fredo? My favorite word, coming from the mouth of such a delicious little girl." And then he leans forward and puts his index finger on her bottom lip, which is very creepy, and he smiles and he says, "So, you precious little rosebud, is your father home?" And right as he says that, we see Major Gage come out from a doorway inside the house. But then we turn the page and we cut back to the bar, which is now a crime scene, and we see a bunch of police officers, and we definitely see Kyle's smashed head on the concrete outside, and the police are taking witness statements. And over the panels of the police looking inside and investigating a bit, the narration from the beginning continues saying, "I believe policies that favor one race do so to the detriment of another. I believe political correctness is a line no one believes. Not one white, not one black, not one Jew bastard, not one fairy. No one. I believe we are on the verge of another revolutionary war. I believe skin color will be the uniforms of that second revolution." Then we cut back to Major Gage's house, where the man from the helicopter is now in the big room with the glass wall that Gage likes to have his meetings in on the second floor. And Major Gage is standing at ease next to a table with his daughter Gwyneth sitting in a chair next to it. And behind them are the three goons, and in front of all of them, the head honcho guy has his back to them and he's staring out of the glass window. And as he looks outside, he says, "Now, Ellison, what are we going to do about my problem?" And Major Gage asks, "Problem, Mr. Manor?" And Manor turns around with a grin and says, "Call me SW. All my friends do. Right, Fredo?" And the head henchman that looks like Tom Selleck from the last issue answers, "That's correct, Mr. Manor." Then Manor goes over to Gage, and Gage is handing him an envelope of some kind, and Gage says, "Correct. Good word. We need some correction here." And then Manor opens the envelope, and we see it's full of money, and he says, "I gave this to you to fund your amusing little cause. Am I incorrect in assuming that your guns were delivered?" And Gage answers, "No." So this was the money that Wolfman was supposed to be paid for the guns. And Mr. Manor looks very angry and he says, "No. Am I correct in assuming that Wolfman, the arms dealer, is dead?" And Gage answers, "Yes." And then Manor turns from him and gives the money to Fredo, and then he looks back and says, "Yes. Well, that's the problem, isn't it?" And then Gage tries to answer saying, "My problem, Mr. SW, I've dealt with it." And Mr. Manor asks, "Have you? What about the man he worked for?" And Gage answers, "Wolfman was in business for himself." And then Manor turns around quickly and he points at Gage and says, "Now you're assuming, Ellison. See, Wolfman, he worked for me." And Gage is surprised by this and he says, "What? But you..." But Manor cuts him off saying, "Gave you the money to buy the guns? Israeli guns, manufactured by Manor Worldwide Industries." And Gage frowns and says, "That doesn't make any sense." And then Manor narrows his eyes at him, and then he walks over to Gage closely, and he points his finger in his chest and says, "You assume to tell me how to conduct my business? I own a successful hamburger franchise, don't I, Fredo?" And Fredo answers, "Counting a recent acquisition, you own 4, sir." And Manor continues, "And I own cattle ranches and slaughterhouses that supply the meat, right?" And Fredo answers, "Yes, sir." And then Manor walks back over to the window and says, "Stop with the sir. Who am I really, Fredo?" And Fredo answers, "You're SW Manor, one of the richest men in the world. And as Manor stares at his reflection in the window, he says, rich is an insignificant word to describe what I am. So Fredo attempts again to describe Manor, and he says, how about influential or powerful? And then Manor turns around and says, powerful. I like that word, because it would take a powerful man to be able to make a single call that could have this idyllic, pristine big sky country turned into a lumber yard, or, say, annexed as a national park when the Senate next convenes. And then he walks over to Gage, who narrows his eyes at him, and he puts his face right in front of Gage and he says, I could do that. I'm that powerful. And then he turns and continues saying, or influential, take your pick. But Ellison, I wouldn't feel good about that. My man Wolfman is dead. I feel bad about that. I suppose I could take the proverbial eye. And then Manor looks down at Gwyneth, who's been sitting in a chair this whole time, and as he walks towards her, he says, or eyes, and be done with this. I'm prepared to do that, but I don't think it would feel good. And I need to feel good. And then he smiles at Gwyneth and says, I need to come in someone's mouth. And Gage looks very shocked at this, and Gwyneth looks very taken aback. But Manor just smiles at her, and he says, correction, not just anybody's. Yours, Ellison, or hers. And then he unzips his pants. Then we turn the page, and we cut to Jimmy, the leader of the neo-Nazis' house, and we see his wife is at home cleaning pots and pans, and Jimmy is in his bedroom getting acquainted with the weaponry he stole from Wolfman. And as he dry fires the guns multiple times, we see his little baby boy is sitting and watching him and clapping, and he's smiling at the boy. And over these panels, the narration from the beginning continues saying, I believe violence can be a positive thing. I believe that because they're black is a good enough reason to kill them. I believe that if you can't speak English, then you should get the fuck out of my country. I believe that AIDS is not a disease, but a cure. I believe that cripples and retards, or anyone who can't pull their own weight in society, should be put out of their misery for the good of those that can. I believe in the final solution, and I want to be part of it. And in the panel under that last bit of narration, we see Jimmy look up alerted like he hears something, and then he goes over to the window and he sees police pulling up, and they're there because of what happened at the bar and all of Jimmy's friends being murdered, and Jimmy doesn't know that though, so he assumes they're coming maybe for his guns. And we've already heard in his narration that he doesn't like the government, so maybe the police are an extension of that. So as the police come to the door and knock on it, we get some more narration that says, I believe what happened in Ruby Ridge and Waco was unjustified. I believe what happened in Oklahoma City was just. I believe there are more people who believe what I believe than let on, because they're afraid. I believe in setting an example. And in the panels underneath this narration, we see Jimmy go down the stairs. He still has his firearm in his hands, and as the wife is speaking to the police officers at the front door, they look behind her and see him appear with a gun in his hands, and I guess because Jimmy thinks that they're there for him and the guns, he just points the guns at them. Now, we already know it's not loaded because he was dry firing it earlier, so I don't know what he thinks he's going to do here. So as he points his firearm at them, of course the police pull theirs out, and as they run in, they push his wife to the side. And as Jimmy points the gun at him in this last panel, we get one last piece of narration that says, I believe if you don't live for something, you'll die for, and it just leaves it hanging, because as we turn the page, we see the police fire at him and shoot him right in the forehead and kill him. And as he falls down dead, his wife runs over to his body and cries over him. Then we turn the page and we cut back to Major Gage's house, and it looks like S.W. Manor and his goons have gone, but him and his daughter Gwyneth are sitting in that same room with the big window, and they're just staring out, and they're not talking to each other. And Gage has a pretty ashamed look on his face, and he reaches out to his daughter, who's kind of cradling herself in her arms, and as he touches her, she turns and spits into his face and says, homosexuality is a sin in the eyes of the Lord. So we can assume from that Major Gage was the one who I guess, gave a blowjob to S.W. Manor instead of making his daughter do it. So she's so disgusted by him that she walks out of the room, and we see Gage looking very hurt by that. Then we cut to the outside of Gage's house, where we can see him through the window in silhouette, and we see John and the golem standing there like John was about to have the golem attack him as well. And as John watches, he says, it seems someone's done me work here, and a nasty job of it too. And then he turns to the golem and says, so with that, good night, sweet golem. And he sticks out his index finger, and he rubs off one of the letters on the forehead of the golem, and the golem falls down dead. And as John walks away, we see the police ride up, and they're about to go into Gage's house, and I presume they'll find the body of Wolfman there too. So that will take care of Major Gage. Then we follow John, who's walking just around the area, I guess, and it's the same night, and as he walks, we see the ghost of Marjorie's husband, Lucky, appear, and if you remember before, he can't speak because he blew open his mouth when he killed himself, so he has a notepad, and he writes something and holds it up to John, and it says, I owe you. And the reason why he owes John is because John just did him a favor and got Marjorie out of this whole white supremacist group. Now, I don't know if he changed her views on things, and I guess she could go and find another one, but maybe John talked some sense into her last issue while they were walking and talking. So as John reads the notepad, he lights a cigarette and says, didn't do it for you, mate. And then Lucky scribbles something and holds it up, and it says, I know, and I owe you. And John says, all right, Lucky, say you do. What you have I could possibly give a toss about. And then Lucky writes something and holds up his pad, and it says, my confession. And John says, what? And then Lucky scribbles and holds up the notepad, and it says, no, why? And John kind of smirks at that, and then Lucky writes something and shows it to John, and John looks at it kind of seriously as he reads it. And then Lucky writes something else, and as Lucky's writing that, John looks like he's getting more and more mad. And then Lucky shows him the last thing he writes, and John tries to punch him in the face, and he yells, no! Then we turn the page, and we cut to Marjorie's house, and it is completely ablaze. John is standing and watching it burn down. So we can kind of assume that John maybe set this fire. And as John stares at the flames, Marjorie runs up, because I guess she just got home, and she sees John standing there, and she says, John, what happened? My house! And John, looking very angry, not staring at her, says, I know why Lucky topped his miserable self. And then he looks over to her and says, really why? And Marjorie looks down ashamed and says, oh. And then there's a long pause, and then she says, you don't. But John cuts her off. He doesn't want to hear it, and he says, save it, Marjorie. Fucking save it. So she shuts up, and John just stares at her house burning, not saying anything. And then he turns, and he begins to walk away from her, and she says, please don't hate me, John. And John says, without looking back, hate you? That's a lot of trouble. Takes commitment. Perhaps I should, but you just ain't worth me effort. And then John walks away from her completely and leaves her standing watching her house burn. And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So they definitely left us on a cliffhanger. We have no idea what Lucky told him, but it definitely pissed John off and made him not like Lucky or Marjorie. So hopefully that's all answered in the next couple issues. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestransandcomicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com, and we will see you on the next one.